it's like they've all jumped onto the teal movement instead of the gender critical movement. They're all being captured by that. We have to wonder how many times does the e-safety commissioner need to be smacked down before she stops issuing these takedown notices. I mean, this woman getting paid $500,000 to police everyone's speech. Even though you might be able to say those things, it doesn't mean that you will be able to escape civil or even criminal penalties.
Hello and welcome to Spectator Australia TV. I'm your host, online editor Alexandra Marshall, and today we're talking to Katherine Deves, a solicitor and director of Common Sense Defence. Katherine, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Alexandra.
Look, it's an activist frenzy right now. We're hearing an awful lot about speaking truth to power and truth telling and all of these kinds of things. But when it comes to biological women's rights, I'm noticing there's not a lot of enthusiasm for factual conversation or speaking the truth. Are you finding it difficult to have the debates that need to be had to ensure legal rights for women when you can't actually speak?
Well, it depends on what jurisdiction you're looking at. Obviously, the UK have had their resounding win with the unanimous full bench in the Supreme Court in the Four Women Scotland that says that women are biological females. You've got litigation running in the US, and obviously you've got the champion in Donald Trump. But here in Australia, we just don't seem to be making the same progress. We are very much behind, and we have a government in position who has brought in all these problems around gender identity and where biological sex has been collapsed into gender identity. And now we are just seeing encroachments onto the little, I wouldn't even call it freedom of speech, Alexandra. We have very limited speech in Australia compared to somewhere like the United States. And there are constant encroachments, hate speech, vilification, discrimination. And as we're seeing, there are people being pulled into tribunal processes, into court for stating what are basic facts. And as we've seen in New South Wales, there's new legislation that's come in that's going to even further restrict our ability to talk about rights based on sex for biological women.
Well, it's a little bit alarming because Australia was one of the most progressive nations for women's rights. I believe we were either the first or one of the first to give women the voting right. And yet somehow we're falling behind the rest of our Western kin when it comes to women's rights. What I don't understand, Catherine, is that we imported every random activist trend from the UK and the US, whether it was Black Lives Matter, climate change, trans activism. We adopted it all first. And yet, for some reason, now that the mood is changing in America, now that we've had court cases in the UK, why aren't Australian politicians adopting those trends when they're so keen to present themselves as modern and progressive? It seems odd to me. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, there's no excuse for Australia to be, 5, 10 years behind the rest of the world. It's not like we're waiting for the boat from London to bring the news and and bring letters of what's actually happening in the rest of the world. But I think this is something I give a lot of thought to. But with respect to women's rights in Australia, I mean, we essentially, when we got the vote, we got it before the UK. We didn't have to engage in basically guerrilla warfare like those women did over there to be able to get the right. We kind of politely asked for it, and it was granted to us. I mean, we had a contingent of suffragettes go over to the UK to assist the women over there. And I think we've just been very complacent about it. We have a very good lifestyle here broadly. We have good weather. People go to the beach after work. They don't go and sit in the pub and talk politics like they do in the UK. They're a lot more politically switched on. The activism over there is a lot more professional than here. We also have the tyranny of distance, with all the cities. So it is very hard to organise. So I think we've just become very complacent. And I mean, it really, but I'm really befuddled by why so many women have just jumped on board with this idea that, woman is identity. I mean, I think the women who are pushing that, the women who are, in the media, I mean, I question whether they've ever experienced male violence. I mean, these are not the women going to prisons or domestic violence shelters. They're not the women who are bearing the burden of these policies that they're promulgating, and they just want to be seen to be kind, to be inclusive, all those buzzwords. But there's sort of a further idea to that, which is, in the UK, which we call Turf Island, the women who've all jumped on board in defending women's sex-based rights. It's sort of those, older middle-aged women who are professionals, who sort of woke up one day, realised they hadn't saved the world because they'd been too busy doing the juggle and raising children. And then they saw this movement that could give their life meaning. It's something that they could fight for. And so over there, they've jumped on this sort of gender critical movement. They had the Mumsnet online, the online groups there that sort of captured a lot of women and educated them on this issue. Whereas here in Australia, there's sort of, it's like they've all jumped onto the teal movement instead of the gender critical movement. They're all been captured by that. And that movement, with all their climatism and inclusivity and all that, and that's sort of where they've all coalesced. So unfortunately, with our gender critical movement here in Australia, it is quite disparate and fractured. And a lot of the women that should have really come here, they've all jumped on the teal bandwagon instead.
Yes, I believe I wrote an article about the women that you and I know very well, the Teal women who we share a school, Catherine and I. We know these women quite well. And it's actually kind of sad because they were told they were going to save the world and they were going to be strong, independent women. And I mean, they're still strong, independent women, but not saving the world like they were promised. And so, whether it's sticking a solar panel on their car or on their roof of their house or buying a Tesla or whatever it is, they think these social issues help them to reimagine that life's dream of theirs. And perhaps this inclusivity idea of we're being inclusive and tolerant, that also makes them feel like they're saving the world in some way. Unfortunately, what they're also doing is destroying women's rights for every other woman out there who is not as privileged as them. And I'm sure they don't have the experiences that you hear about all the time, where women are now being put in danger because of this radical kindness, shall we call it. But I also want to talk about a mutual friend of ours, Billboard Chris, who had a victory against the e-safety commissioner. It was kind of funny with everybody cheering on the Canadian against the Australians, but we did want Billboard Chris to win, and he has won. It means that there's been some kind of victory in law that says, yes, you can, at least on social media, speak a bit of truth about gender and biological sex and what these things mean. Are you excited about this, or are you worried and concerned that this victory in free speech online will be superseded by domestic laws?
Look, it is a mixed victory. Obviously, it is a decisive victory, and we have to wonder how many times does the e-safety commissioner need to be smacked down before she stops issuing these takedown notices. I mean, this woman getting paid $500,000 to police everyone's speech. It's disgraceful. But with Billboard Chris, I mean, essentially it means that she can't issue takedown notices. So you can say these things on social media, but the question is, okay, so you say these things, but it doesn't mean that you might not get captured by hate speech or vilification or anti-discrimination or any number of the multitude of tribunals that are there protecting these sort of sacred cow classes of people who are now immune from any negativity or any criticism. No matter what their ideas are, no matter what they have done, you will immediately get classified as a phobe of some sort. And I mean, Billboard Chris is not the only person being dragged through the mud. Obviously, there's Kira Smith. I mean, I think she's up to 9 or 10 proceedings where she spoke against the men who compete in women's soccer. So even though you might be able to say those things, it doesn't mean that you will be able to escape civil or even criminal penalties in some instances.
Well, you wrote an article in the Spectator Australia last week about one of these laws. It was the Equity Legislation Amendment LGBTIQA Plus Act in New South Wales. Can you tell us about why you are worried about this particular amendment and what it means for women?
So this is an amendment to our Anti-Discrimination Act. It's the LGBTIQA plus equality bill that was promulgated by Alex Greenwich, independent MP for Sydney, who likes to tout himself as a women's rights advocate. But every time I look at what he's doing in this space, it's legislation that effectively harms women. And there's a whole lot of pieces to this. The first iteration of this bill was absolutely just insane. It was sort of looking to amend about 50 different pieces of legislation. But essentially what it boils down to is, I mean, there's things in there that are just really random and ugly, like it's decriminalised pimping, it's allowed commercial surrogacy if Australians go overseas, well, New South Wales residents go overseas. But it also means it's the sex self ID bill here, obviously. So you don't need a diagnosis, you don't need a doctor's note, you don't need to have surgery. You just pop on down to the registry or go online and you can change your sex to a word of any of your choosing, provided it's not profanity or uses symbols or like a word that you're not entitled to, like, I don't know, HRH. Or
It sounds like a password definition. You're given boundaries of it must include or not include certain characters. This is now gender.
So there's that component, and then there's also these fortified sort of hate speech and vilification laws. So in particular, it's now a crime to out someone with respect to their gender identity, their HIV status, or whether they've been a prostitute. So and it also moves into the domestic and personal violence legislation, where if you do this outing, you may be actually guilty of a crime for which you can be incarcerated. So it's very, very much putting a chill on free speech because you won't be able to talk about this. You won't be able to, you won't even be able to mention someone's sex or gender identity or sexual orientation, even if it has great bearing on what they're doing. You could conceivably be guilty of, be subjected to civil sanctions. And it's just an absolute stifling of freedom of speech. And then when we look at what's happening with women, and also parents, and women not being able to say, hey, there's a dude playing in my soccer in the opposition soccer team, and I want to complain about it on socials. Well, suddenly they're in trouble. I mean, just talk to Kira Lee. So it's sort of protecting these people, just ring fencing them, so they're just completely immune to any criticism or any public discussion of public acts that they're engaged in, where they are actually intruding upon other people's rights. And we need to be able to have these debates. We have to.
The point about the UK ruling in the courts was, what's the point of having a law that protects women or biological rights if those biological rights no longer exist in social reality? Not obviously in reality, but if socially we say there's no difference between a man and a woman, you can decide what you are, well, then what happens to those laws that were meant to protect biological reality? And of course, the UK courts fell down on the side of, well, yes, we have to, as the court, as the law, we have to say, yes, reality is the reason for this law to exist, therefore we will uphold it. So what happens what's the argument for people and politicians who are arguing this in Australia? Why do we have sex-based laws if they don't believe that sex is the defining feature? How does that work? What is the purpose of protecting sex if you don't believe in sex?
Well, it's just a massive game of pretense. I mean, you can, fiddle around with language as much as you want, but it won't override the fact that biological sex exists and it absolutely matters. And we absolutely should be recognising these categories in law. They seem to have just gone down this rabbit hole where it's just, well, in Australia, for example, sex, it's not binary, it's changeable, it's not related to biological sex anymore. It's just this amorphous group of, say, actual biological women, of men who might have a certificate saying their birth certificate, they've changed it, and also men who just want to say that they're women. And that's supposed to be a cohesive category that's recognisable in law. And Alexandra, it doesn't work. It's not cohesive. It doesn't make sense. So, it's not to say that, I mean, the law as it stands at the moment, you do have these men who can change their birth certificates. You do have men pretending to be women, but it doesn't override the fact that there are still biological women who need protection. So this is where sort of the pressure point is. And at the moment, it's just this sex just doesn't really mean anything. It's anyone who just want to identify as such. So we've really gotten ourselves into this huge muddle. And unfortunately, we just don't have political will in this country to fix it. So, individuals are having to go to the courts to try and sort it out.
Well, it comes down to two things for me. One, the courts are supposed to uphold reality as a primary function. No matter how much it annoys people or upsets people, reality should be the primary objective of a court of law. Otherwise, what is the purpose of law? And the other thing is that obviously biological sex mattered enough to create the law in the first place. So making an amendment to a law means that it seems to me that they have fundamentally misunderstood the foundation and purpose of that law to begin with, which is a real worry that politicians are doing that. But let me just throw this out at you. Over in the UK, obviously that's where the ruling was, but there is a broadcasting regulator called Ofcom, and they are they're like our e-safety commissioner, but really powerful. And they're still not quite sure, Catherine, what a woman is. So Toby Young from the Free Speech Union wrote an article in the Spectator UK about GB News, because GB News has been the target of Ofcom several times, and they sort of went knocking at Ofcom and said, "Hey, just want to check. Now we've had this court case. Can we discuss biological reality on our TV program?" And Ofcom, surprisingly, did not say that. So I'm going to quote the article here from Toby Young, because, of course, climate change is a settled science compared to Ofcom. They think that's settled. But biological reality, not so much. They said, I'm quoting, Ofcom described GB News' view that the word woman should be defined in relation to biological sex, and that was acceptable to refer to athletes by their biological pronouns as dogmatic propositions. Such editorial judgments, it said, required nuanced decision making. Catherine, what? I mean, the science is not settled on biology, apparently, according to Ofcom.
Well, we have to be able to speak the truth. I mean, for example, this whole debate about pronouns that's gone on for years and years and years, and it's like, oh, okay, a trans girl, well, she's being excluded from the girls' sport. And everyone goes, oh, that poor trans girl. And so they're saying there is a boy who's not allowed to play in the girls' sports competition. I mean, it has an impact. And the fact that such a powerful body, as you rightly pointed out, is so ideologically captured, and that they're coming down, they're holding positions on really contested ideas. And, well, with climate, but with biology, I mean, we know that 99.98% of people are born inarguably one sex or the other. It's very clear. Very occasionally you might get someone with ambiguous genitalia, but that is attributable to one sex or the other. So we must be very clear. I mean, we look at how this issue is playing out in law, and when you talk to people, people are so confused. The left have done a really good job of confusing people by capturing the language. People think that a trans woman is a female who pretends to be a man. They don't understand what non-binary is. It's just we have to be clear with language, particularly in the law. And looking at the media, I mean, their job is to just report the facts, unless it's, of course, opinion. But they shouldn't be being reprimanded by Ofcom for stating what so evident facts that are evident to everyone. It's a gross abuse of power, and it's really good to see the Free Speech Union standing up to them and exposing them for their ideological nonsense.
Yes, well, they do a lot of great work, the Free Speech Union. One very final quick question here, Catherine. Given how broad this problem is in Australia, where would you start? What would be your first position to start chipping away at this intersection of activism and reality? What would you like to see change? Do we need a court verdict? Do we need a politician to pass a piece of legislation? How do we begin to make this better?
Needs to be multi-pronged. So while we don't have political will, we need to go and fight it out in the courts. But ultimately, it does have to be a legislative solution, and we need to get back to just common sense laws. I mean, nobody's saying that trans people should not have jobs or be able to rent a property or so forth, but their rights should not be intruding upon women's rights. And unfortunately, we are going to have to fight this out in the courts, and hearts and minds across Australia. I mean, the vast majority of Australians do agree. They don't think that it's right for boys to be in girls' sports. And I think the politicians need to start listening to the people. And then the other thing is this professional activist class, where we have all these NGOs and all these charities that are heavily government subsidised. And when you look at their budgets, oftentimes it's like, 60, 70, 80% government grants. And then the vast majority of their budget actually goes to employee expenses. So they have this absolute army of activists who are there lobbying and writing press releases and hosting, rainbow cupcake lunches and funding all this activism. We taxpayers are funding all this activism. So I think there needs to be, a really deep dive into some of these prominent charities that are promulgating these ideas that do not resonate with the vast majority of Australians, and their funding needs to be cut off. because we should not be outsourcing the government's dirty work to these charities and NGOs that are able to escape sort of parliamentary scrutiny and the normal checks and balances of government, all the while using taxpayer funds to do what they do.
I think Donald Trump might have had the right idea with his cutting of US aid. All of a sudden, the activists didn't have any money and they didn't know what to do. So maybe wink, wink, nudge, nudge to the Conservatives, if we still have any, that might be a good election pitch for you. We will silence all this rabid nonsense of imported activism and get back to the real activism, which is women like you who are fighting grassroots on your own, back to the top to restore women's rights. Katherine, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spectator TV.
Great to be on Spectator. Thanks, Alexandra.